York. This is Midnight Oil. We decided to play some songs in the street for you today. We chose a special location, the front of the Exxon building. I'll leave you to work out why.
The Breakfast Creek Hotel is up for sale. The last square mile of terra firma gathered in the mail. Farewell to those Norfolk Island pines. No amount of make-believe can help this heart of mine.
I wanted to talk to you about your reflections, I guess, in many ways, on where music sits as a catalyst for social change, and to take us right to the beginning of the Oils and what the original idea really was for the Oils, whether or not it was this from the start, you know, we're five against the world and we're going to change the world and take no prisoners while we do it. What was that original ethos for the band in terms of taking positions on really important social issues?
Well, I mean, we were just kids when we started the band. I don't think we're even thinking about social issues. I don't think we're thinking about any other issues. I think we just wanted to get this schoolboy band, you know, maybe to get some gigs and then perhaps make an album and, you know, just humble dreams. But, you know, year after year it kind of grew. And I can't speak for the others really, Trace, but in my case, I was very influenced by a lecturer I had I went to Sydney Uni for a while doing a course, and I was very influenced by one of the lecturers there. And she kind of turned me on to civil rights. She was American, and she turned me on to the civil rights movement, which I knew very little about back then. And from there, I kind of, you know, listening to my heroes of the day, whether they be John Lennon or Dylan or John Fogerty from Creedence, and then increasingly some of the local great songwriters of the time, which just preceded us, like, Don Walker from Chisel, Paul Kelly, Greg McCain from Skyhooks. Yeah, I mean, I just kind of, I think we're all just in our own individual ways trying to put it together. It might have come out more organised than we actually were, hopefully. But but I think early on, maybe I was one of the first early on to realise that the bands and the music that I loved most was music that actually meant something, was saying something. There was a narrative. There was a reason to make it other than just, you know, smashing a guitar or a drum kit or whatever. You know, it seemed to me that the songs I gravitated towards, including those artists I just mentioned, they were great artists in their own right, but they were also saying amazing things. And whether they knew it or not, or whether that was their intention, they were in their own way changing the world. And I just thought that was much stronger than just being another band kicking around the pub, saying nothing, you know, just writing about the usual dross. And I always found that more compelling, you know, those writers. And because I had this background and interest in history, I kept on delving. And so when it came to write stuff along with Jim Magini from the Oils, I think I already had a clear idea right from the get-go that I wanted to write songs that just meant something a little bit more, you know. And so the first song on the first album, Powderworks, was kind of set the template for all the years that came after.
That late 70s period, that early genesis of the band, which was, you know, a noisy period. It was, you know, the height of punk. and the real kind of dominance of pub rock in Australia as well. But as the band moved into the early 80s, there was this very strong intersect with some of those very significant global issues. The anti-nuclear movement was really, there was a genuine fear that we were all going to go up in a mushroom cloud, but it was also intertwined for the Oils with this deep sense of kind of the potential of a kind of an eco calamity. And those two things sort of coalesced for the band in those early years, and doing shows like the Stop the Drop concert, which ended up being a fusion of both of those things. What are your recollections of what was happening, the momentum that was happening around that time, and the artists that were sort of coalescing again around some of those important issues, and including First Nations issues too in that early period?
Yeah, so at the time, I mean, you look back on it now and think, that was a really precarious time. There was a series of Russian premiers, Chernenko and Andropov, Brezhnev, and they were facing off against Reagan, the United States, and Thatcher in the UK. And we really thought that a nuclear winter was just one step around the corner. And we weren't the only ones thinking this way. Billy Bragg was already well established in the UK. There were the beginnings of bands like U2 and others that were writing stuff like that. The Clash, of course, we're often compared to some of those bands, even though our background was quite different. I guess all of those bands were just thinking along the same lines, that the music we made should address some of these dangers and fears that we had. And I think they were real fears. I mean, I think every generation thinks we're on the brink of something and we might be once again. But at that time particularly, I think there was a real feeling of danger. Yeah, so as you said, Tracy, we got involved in these concerts before the bomb ball. There was one in Paddington Town Hall. There was a lot of anti-nuke gigs that we ended up doing with others. When we finally got to the UK and into Europe and into the States, we joined others. There was a CND gig in London that we got involved with, and and we kind of nailed our colours to the mast pretty early on, and then increasingly, of course, and particularly in the case of Pete Garrett, he got more and more concerned about the potential for an international calamitous nuclear incident, and that became part of his writing as well, with songs like Maralinga. And so by the time we got to the mid-80s, it had become very much part of what we did. Even though we were recording in different parts around the world, we recorded it in Japan, we recorded it in the UK, and increasingly, we sort of became this political rock band from Australia without even kind of knowing it. And what it really was just all the members of the band being on the same wavelength and thinking, this band can be part of this pushback, if you like, in our own small way, it was kind of one thing led to another, and that affected the writing as well. As I said before, I always thought that the writing would be stronger if it addressed things, and with my own writing, I, in combination with Jim Magini, started writing more stuff, which ended up like A River Runs Red, and Jim wrote US Forces. There were other songs later on which addressed the environment in different ways. In Japan, Kosciuszko, Who Can Stand in the Way, and so on. And then, of course, by the time Diesel and Dust came along, it was kind of the ultimate environmental album, because you mentioned First Nations musicians before. Well, in some way, almost all of their music is involved with holding on to country, protecting country, looking after the land, their relationship with the land. That's basically probably their strongest leitmotif in life, to write music that way. And we were getting involved in those bands. We knew all the members of No Thanks to Dress and Us Mob and Warumpies, and then later on Yothu Yindi, Gurumul, all of those people we'd actually got to know, and including the Whitefellas at the time as well, Shane Howard and then John Butler, of course, came in the scene very, very strong to this day on all this stuff. And sort of here and overseas, we became part of this whole pushback, if you like, and, you know, very proudly so. You know, with Pete arriving at Pine Gap near Alice, you know, and flipping over the closed Pine Gap sign and turning up at Jabiluka, where Ranger, you know, we're just starting their uranium mine up there. It's been a long journey. It's very hard to get everything in chronological order because there's been so much. But yeah, I'm really proud of the band members that were able to actually stick together over such a long period of time, 45 years, give or take, maybe more if we go back to schoolboy days, over 50 years. And even with the time life that we had and when Pete went directly into politics, we were still able to join forces and realise that the collective of all of us that we'd built up and the catalogue of music that we'd made and recorded was stronger than anything that any of us individually could do, and that it was worth something, you know, it was worth pursuing.
It also meant that the band was very uncompromising and engaged in a lot of risk around taking those stands. There was some very significant flashpoints moments, and perhaps you can talk to some of them. The flatbed truck performance out in the middle of New York, outside the Exxon building, the sorry suits at the Olympic Games, you know, are two that really kind of come to mind as very powerful moments that the band took a stand. How much did you assess the risk? You know, what was that conversation like in the band? You know, did you feel that there was anything that was really risky about doing that, or was the commitment so strong that was who you were? It was the oils in the world, and we take a stand on things, and that's what we do, and that was the prevailing thought.
Yeah, exactly. That was. We thought, you know, if not us, then who's going to do it? I mean, there's obviously other bands that could do it, but we were fortunate as the 80s became the 90s that we had quite a big international profile. So we thought, okay, we're the band to do this stuff. And so when the Exxon disaster happened, Prince William Sound, off the west coast of the United States and Canada, we thought, you know, Exxon are just going to wipe this. You know, I mean, we're in New York and we're looking up at the Exxon building and we're looking at all these faces pressed at the window from the people at Exxon. They're looking down at the stage of this Australian band that's just unfolded with a banner. Midnight Oil makes you dance, Exxon makes you sick. And they're going, you know, this is just a pipsqueak little thing. I mean, our share price hasn't changed since this disaster. But, you know, I think that went around the world, you know, and I think it's incredible how these small little activism, these stands can make such a huge difference. People still talk about it, people that were there, people that saw the film clip of that later on, people who heard about it, particularly back in Australia. And then you mentioned the sorry shirts of the Olympics. Well, that was another one. It's like, okay, so we've been given this opportunity for a mass international audience. Howard and co. refused to say sorry to the stolen generations that have suffered so much. Yothu Yindi are on the bill, and they're going to play their hit song Treaty. And we're on directly after. You know, are we going to be we're just going to play our new single, or are we going to play the song that everyone knows and make a big deal out of it? And we went to the desert and we spent a couple of days in the desert talking about it, and there was, like everything we did, there was always a divided opinion, but eventually we realised that this was an opportunity to right some wrongs and set the government straight. And once again, you know, yeah, I mean, it's just like not a lot of bands do this kind of stuff. You mentioned the risk, but I think it would have been riskier for us not to do these kind of activism. There was another one. It features in the this Hardest Line film clip, which has just come out recently, which is when we turned up on the west coast of Canada with Macmillan Bladell, the clear felling company, were taking they were clear felling all this Douglas fir over there, and against the wishes of the First Nations people there and Greenpeace and others that were trying to stop it. And we did a dawn concert there in the forest, and we only just escaped with our lives. I mean, it was just right in the middle of all these logging families. And whilst we totally got that it was their lifestyle and who are these Australians coming over here and telling us what we should be doing, I mean, these are big international topics, like climate change now. And so, of course, we had any right to go anywhere to talk about this stuff. And so, that one was particularly risky, actually. We just managed to, if you get to see the film, you just get to manage. We just managed to get out of there without the truck being rolled over. But yeah, I mean, it's Midnight Oil. It's us. It's what we do. It's what we did.
Mm. When you reflect on those moments and the ability of the band to really sort of mix music and politics and activism, in a way that gave it something to dance to as well. It wasn't all, in your face. Well, it was in your face, but there was this sense of that the songwriting was also at the heart of the lyric writing and creating, a soundtrack, for multiple generations in Australia and around the world, that we were sort of, hopefully singing our way to a better future. When you reflect on the impact of those songs, have you landed at a place where you sort of feel like, if one person changed their mind by hearing Beds Are Burning or Blue Sky Mine or some of the other great anthems of the Oils, is that sort of some kind of visceral sense of, job well done? I mean, was that the plan, that, we're going to win hearts and minds by, singing people to a better place?
I think we realised early on that it was one thing to do all these activists turning up and being activists and getting up on stage, and Pete in that remarkable way of his, regaling the audience about what we should do. And that was all fine, but that really wouldn't have gone anywhere if we hadn't got the catalogue, the music to back it up. So basically, early on, Jim and I realised, okay, so Pete's this extraordinary, charismatic frontman. And in my own opinion, the greatest Australia's ever had. People just at those gigs could not take their eyes off him. He was just extraordinary frontman. Okay, so we've got this. So it's up to us, Jim and I, to get stuck in and really take songwriting seriously. So with each album, we sold more and more copies, and that kind of put more and more pressure on us in a way to come up with something as good or better, So, so I spent, and I'm sure Jim did, we spent most waking moments when we weren't touring or weren't doing interviews or weren't rehearsing, working up new material. And so that would be presented to the band. Sometimes Pete would go, oh, I love all that, we'll just leave that in its entirety. Sometimes he'd add bits and pieces to it. But the great thing was that Midnight Oil, great players. That's the thing. I mean, I'd always have an idea about how a song would go in my head. And 99% of the time, by the time Jim, Martin, and then, Pete originally, Bear, and then Giffo, and then Bonesy had a go at it. We all got together, the finished thing with great producers like Nick Launay and Warren Livesey and others, by the time everyone had a go at it, the results were much bigger and better than I ever imagined. And I always knew that however long the band would last, the songs would last longer. And that if we were lucky, some of the songs, like some of the songs we'd grown up with, would last generations. And, people might forget the gigs. They might have great memories of gigs, but the songs would live on. So, yeah, we spent a lot of time crafting those songs, getting all the ducks in line, trying to make them as good as possible. And there were a lot of great bands around about there. There was a kind of an unspoken combination. I mean, we came up at a time when, you know, there was great songwriting by people like Mental as Anything. In Excess were doing great work as well with Nick Launay and others. The Models were there doing some outstanding stuff. Chisel were like the best blues rock band in Australia ever. You know, like there was Rose Tattoo were just so visceral and strong and loud, and like, you know, there was a lot of competition. And of course I've got to remember, I've got to mention AC/DC, you know, because all of us came up kind of in the wake of AC/DC's incredible work ethic and success overseas. You know, we thought, okay, so that's where we're going to head. And but that competition is good for you, you know, with the gigs, the live gigs, but also with the songwriting. So it was a very creative, fertile, and competitive atmosphere to be involved with, which is good for bands.
Music has not become any less competitive, and you know, there's only one Midnight Oil, and we're with a group of artists now who all want to step into their activism with their music and use their music as a platform for social change and changing hearts and minds and singing up, you know, the future that we want to be part of. And I feel like that's a conversation that, you know, we've been having for 40 years. You know, with this sort of utopian future that we're all trying to sing up. What advice would you give to artists who are weighing up, you know, the commercial risk of taking a stand on something, the personal cost of putting yourself out there for a cause?
Well, I don't think there is a commercial risk, and I don't think there's a personal cost. I'm sorry to disagree with you, because they're quite the contrary. I think from a personal point of view, I think that if you've been overseas and you've seen the havoc that's happened to the environment overseas, you're terrified that people like Trump might undo this extraordinary, it's called the Inflation Reduction Act or something like that. But, you know, I mean, Joe Biden, for all his faults, doesn't get credit for pouring more billions of dollars into cleaning up the environment and a cleaner future. The biggest expenditure since Roosevelt's New Deal after the Second World War. I mean, you know, Trump is just drill, baby, drill. If you care about these things, then there would be a personal risk not to be involved with it. Because, you know, in the end, you've got to get up in the morning and look yourself in the mirror and go, okay, so what are we doing? What am I doing? You know, how am I contributing? And hey, how lucky am I? I've actually got this medium through the talents of my music and with others, if you're in a band, to actually get together and, yeah, to use the cliche, change a few hearts and minds. I also don't think that there's a commercial risk, because I think that the earth now is crying out for people to be the next generation of the John Butlers and the Oils and the Clash and U2 and all those that have, and all the First Nations bands here and overseas that have made, you know, that have been drumming this, as you say, for decades and decades. And so, yeah, I don't think it's a commercial risk at all. I think quite the contrary. I think you can join a group of people that will, you know, be incredibly successful on the back of their convictions. I mean, look at I don't know if you remember, but we were part of a couple of WOMAD tours overseas, and World of Music and Dance, and we were put together with a whole lot of great acts from all around the world, from Africa, different parts of the world, and they all thought of the earth and the incredible treasure of the earth as being their leitmotif, their musical leitmotif in life, you know. And that was incredible because we were known to be that kind of band, we got to play in front of massive audiences on this tour right across North America. And you know, so I think, yeah, I think the invitations for people who care about this stuff will come thick and fast increasingly in the future.
Rob, thank you. Thank you for spending time with us. Thank you for the music. So in kind of to sum up, you'd say absolutely it's worth it. Making a stand for things with your music, it's worth it.
I think it's great for you. I think it's great for Australian music generally. I think it's you know, if this is where the heart and soul is, and you know, you've seen what an extraordinary place Australia is. You've seen pristine beaches here, unspoiled. You've been up to the Kimberley and you've seen, okay, so that was saved from a gas plant. You've seen, the whale dream of people down in South Australia, Ceduna, push the oil companies, BP and then State Oil, that Norwegian company, off the coast, away from whale dreaming. If you've seen the disaster that's become the Great Barrier Reef, in spite of government after government trying to cover up the massive bleaching and not telling us the truth. If you care about this stuff more than anything, then of course, use your talents. You know, how lucky are we? Do we have this outlet? How lucky are we? Go for it.
Can music change the world?
Well, it's certainly going to be part of it, you know, and I don't think you should ever underestimate the strength and the longevity and viability of a killer song.
Much love to you. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for all the songs and taking us all to the barricades.
So stay warm down there and have a fantastic Green Music get together. Bye now.